Britain's government just got 72 hours to save itself, and the clock started ticking the moment the king opened his mouth. Right now, across every UK platform, one video is detonating. Not a scandal, not a leak. A single, carefully chosen sentence from King Charles during a parliamentary address that constitutional experts are calling the loudest warning shot a modern monarch can fire without crossing the line. Westminster is rattling. The Prime Minister's approval just crashed to -44, and the British public isn't asking for permission anymore. They're demanding a reckoning. Before I break down what he said and why it's seismic, hit that subscribe button right now. When this situation explodes tonight or tomorrow, and it will, you'll want the notification. Most of you watch without subscribing. Don't be in that 98%. This story moves fast. Done? Perfect. Let's expose what's really happening. Here's the battlefield. Over the past 7 days, tens of thousands flooded the streets of London, Glasgow, and Edinburgh. These weren't fringe demonstrations. Families, veterans, students, all converging to debate policing, free speech, and whose voice matters. The protests marked the second anniversary of the October 7th attacks, reigniting cultural fault lines that never fully healed. The Prime Minister's response: he urged caution and called some rhetoric un-British. That phrase didn't calm tensions. It detonated them. Because when a leader tells a country what's British and what isn't during mass protests, he's not defusing a bomb. He's handing matches to both sides. Within hours, hashtags like #BritainDecides and #LetUsVote dominated every timeline. Creators stitched together footage. A nurse finishing a night shift, eyes hollowed out from exhaustion. A teacher standing in an empty classroom explaining why supplies ran out again. A small business owner staring at bills spread across a counter, calculator in hand, doing math that doesn't add up anymore. Every clip asked the same question. When does accountability arrive? Not promises, not 5-year plans. Accountability, now. And that question, amplified across millions of feeds, became the soundtrack to a government losing its grip. Now let's talk numbers, because they're brutal. New polling data shows Keir Starmer's net approval rating plummeting to -44 after the Labour Party conference. For context, that's not a midterm dip. That's a legitimacy hemorrhage. These are some of the worst numbers any sitting Prime Minister has posted in recent history. When your approval is underwater by that margin, you're not governing with a mandate. You're governing on borrowed time. And the British public, exhausted and squeezed, is starting to call in that loan. This isn't polling noise. This is the sound of consent evaporating in real time. Pair that political collapse with economic misery and you understand why the country feels combustible. Food inflation has haunted every kitchen table for months. Yes, headline inflation rates have eased slightly, but prices at the supermarket, still punishing. Supply chain friction, post-Brexit regulatory costs, and labour shortages have kept food prices stubbornly high. Every shopping trip is a gut punch. The Bank of England, facing a public exhausted by high borrowing costs, continues warning that inflation expectations remain elevated. What does that mean in English? Interest rates stay restrictive. Mortgages stay brutal. Rent keeps climbing. Small businesses keep calculating which costs they can't pass on. And voters? They're keeping receipts, literally. Then came the earthquake. During a rare live parliamentary address, King Charles delivered remarks that sounded ceremonial to casual ears, but landed like a constitutional grenade to anyone paying attention. He reminded leaders that Parliament is the living and breathing instrument of our democracy. He spoke about traditions being ancient but needing renewal. Then came the line everyone's dissecting. A careful, almost poetic reminder that institutions only function when they listen. That trust isn't inherited, it's earned continuously. And that the consent of the governed isn't a formality. It's the foundation. Sound polite? It was. But constitutional scholars recognised it immediately. That's as close as a modern British monarch gets to saying, the public is losing faith, and you need to fix this before they fix it for you. Let's be crystal clear about what the king can and cannot do, because misinformation is spreading fast. The monarch does not call elections in modern Britain. Under the Dissolution and Calling of Parliament Act 2022, dissolving Parliament is a royal act, but it's taken on the advice of the Prime Minister. In practice, that means the decision is political, not personal. The king cannot simply decide he dislikes a government and pull the plug. The last time a British monarch personally sacked a government was the 1830s. Nothing about 2025 suggests we're returning to that era. So no, King Charles did not announce an election, but he held up a mirror, and in that mirror, Britain sees a government losing legitimacy by the day. Here's why those carefully neutral phrases hit like thunder. Context, timing, amplification. The King's remarks were clipped, edited, and reposted across every platform within minutes. Those clips appeared in feeds already overflowing with protest footage, economic anxiety, and grim hospital updates. The same week Charles spoke, NHS data confirmed what frontline staff have screamed for months. Emergency department backlogs remain punishing. Tens of thousands of patients are waiting over 12 hours for admission decisions, an almost unimaginable spike compared to pre-pandemic norms. When institutions appear stretched to breaking and a head of state gently reminds leaders that legitimacy requires listening. Polite words can sound like demands, because the subtext isn't subtle. Listen now or the public will force you to listen later. Meanwhile, a separate policy fight is feeding the fire. Ofcom's online safety regime transitioned from white paper theory to real-world enforcement this year. Codes of practice targeting illegal content went live in March. Child protection risk assessments began rolling out in April. Supporters argue the framework protects children and tackles exploitation. Critics warn the tools risk overreach and chill legitimate speech. That policy debate crashed headfirst into the protest narrative. Activists claim posts were throttled or removed. Officials insist the system targets harmful content, not dissent. Whether you believe the regulation is necessary protection or dangerous overreach, it's no longer theoretical. It's in people's lives. And it's become another reason online anger travels fast and organises faster. Let me ground this in real lives, because statistics don't vote. Emotions do. A veteran in Hull records a video explaining he's been waiting weeks for a benefits decision while his rent climbs again. His voice cracks when he talks about service and sacrifice. A single mother in Bristol films herself calculating breakfast costs, then deciding the car stays parked this week because fuel and food don't both fit in the budget anymore. A junior doctor in Manchester sends a voice note at 3 a.m, whispering so she doesn't wake patients, describing a hospital corridor full of people on gurneys because beds don't exist. These aren't partisan actors. They're not reading scripts. They're people under pressure. And when enough people feel unheard, pressure seeks a release valve. Protests, petitions, votes. Inside Westminster, the pressure is metastasising. Labour loyalists point to delivery metrics. Elective surgical appointments are up. Investment bills are moving. Backlog targets are being hit, kind of. But critics inside the party counter with brutal honesty. Not fast enough. Not felt on the ground. We promised transformational change, not incremental improvements and technical explanations. The NHS can proudly cite millions of extra elective appointments since last summer and a drop in the total waiting list from its peak. But if you're the person waiting 13 hours in an emergency department, the government's PDF doesn't comfort you. Momentum swings on what voters feel, not what they read in press releases. Across the aisle, Conservative leadership senses opportunity but faces its own brutal rebuilding project. They can't credibly attack on NHS waits or economic pain without owning their record. Reform UK, meanwhile, is riding algorithmic momentum, hoovering up frustrated voters in polls that shift like sand. Smaller parties pitch competence over chaos, localism over grand Westminster plans. In Parliament's tea rooms, MPs from multiple parties gossip quietly about confidence votes, caretaker cabinets, and the nightmare nobody budgeted for. A winter election. Suddenly, a dry sentence in a constitutional textbook has become the hottest content on TikTok. The monarch dissolves Parliament on advice. Parliament can force the issue by withdrawing confidence. That's the fuse everyone's watching. This isn't just a British story anymore. International observers are watching closely, not with wagging fingers, but with spreadsheets open. The Financial Times published analysis this week, painting a uniquely British economic bind. High import dependence, post-Brexit frictions, regulatory adjustment costs, persistent labour shortages. When domestic politics looks fragile, those structural vulnerabilities feel heavier. Investors start discounting stability. The Bank of England's hawks keep one eye on inflation expectations and another on wage settlements, knowing that cutting rates at the wrong moment can obliterate credibility. Europe watches because supply chains watch. Washington watches because NATO budget commitments watch. Fragile governments make nervous allies. So here's the question dominating every Westminster corridor right now. Does any of this add up to government collapse? In the strict legal sense, no. No midnight letter has crossed the palace threshold. No Commons vote has formally struck down the government. But politics isn't just statutes and procedures. It's momentum. It's perception. Every day that public consent feels thinner, Every news cycle that pairs protest footage with polling slides and supermarket price jumps makes a snap election feel less like a choice and more like an inevitability. The king cannot command that outcome, but the public can. Parliament can. And the sound echoing through the halls of power right now is cold, hard calculus. Social media feeds are amplifying contrasts that tell the story better than any speech. Elites at glittering Westminster receptions versus exhausted paramedics in fluorescent jackets. Sleek lobby dinners versus veterans queuing at food banks. Ministers stepping out of chauffeur-driven cars versus mothers counting coins at the petrol station. The story writes itself because the pictures write it. When a prime minister's approval collapses and a country's patience evaporates, even routine policies become lightning rods. The truth lives in nuance. The algorithm lives in extremes. That's why this moment feels so combustible. So what actually happens next? Tonight, tomorrow, this week, watch 3 critical dials. First, the markets. If sterling continues softening and gilt yields nudge upward on politics rather than economic fundamentals, the City of London will start whispering loudly for certainty. Financial pressure has ended governments before. It can do it again. Second, Parliament itself. If backbench MPs start giving unusually frank interviews, if committee chairs turn cautious on air, if private letters start circulating, confidence arithmetic emerges fast. A government can survive scandals. It cannot survive its own MPs losing faith publicly. Third, the streets. If demonstrations remain broad, pulling in families, retirees, veterans, students, not just activists, calls for a ballot box solution become impossible to paint as fringe noise. That coalition forces timetables. And King Charles, he will not tear up the Constitution on a live stream. That's not how this works. But he can, and almost certainly will, keep doing exactly what he did this week. Remind leaders gently but clearly that legitimacy is not inherited. It's renewed. It's earned every single day. In a constitutional monarchy, that reminder carries weight. It's not a command. It doesn't have to be. In a moment like this, it can feel like one. That's why his words, clipped and shared across millions of feeds, felt stunning to some and soothing to others. They were a mirror held up to a democratic system that only functions if it listens. Here's the unvarnished truth. Britain is standing at the edge of a democratic stress test in the full glare of the digital age. A government hemorrhaging political capital, a public paying inflation's ongoing bill while waiting 12 hours on hospital chairs, a regulatory framework rolling out as protests surge, a polling map tilting in real time, and a monarchy whose every carefully chosen syllable ricochets through the algorithmic feed. There's no royal coup coming, no magic wand, just a nation asking loudly, insistently, for consent to be renewed. The collapse, if it comes, won't look like midnight drama at Buckingham Palace. It will be slow, methodical, the gradual congealing of lost public confidence into backbench letters, then a Commons vote, and finally a date circled on the calendar. Election Day. Is this the week Britain turns the page? Or just another grinding chapter in a long stalemate? Does a careful royal nudge steady the ship? Or does it accelerate the reckoning everyone sees coming? Should an early election be the democratic reset that restores consent? Or would it deepen divides and spook an already fragile economy? Those questions don't have easy answers. But they demand answers. Soon. Here's what I need from you right now. Drop a comment. Should the UK hold an early general election? Yes or no, and why? Should party leaders change their course, or should they change their faces entirely? What should King Charles say next, if anything at all? I'm reading every single comment, because this conversation matters. It's not theatre. It's democracy under pressure, and your voice is part of that pressure. If this breakdown helped you cut through the noise and understand what's actually at stake, share it. Send it to someone still confused about why this week felt so seismic. And make absolutely sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on. The moment Parliament moves, the moment the polling shifts again, the moment the next shoe drops, you're getting the update first. This story isn't over. It hasn't even peaked yet. Britain is holding its breath, and the next 72 hours will tell us whether this government survives or whether the public just forced a reset nobody saw coming.